think, unsound in terms of academic.
So I agree with you. I'd like to have better statistics. Now let me ask you a question on that. Do you think that the rape rate in the United States on college campuses is closer to 6 in 1,000 or 250 in 1,000?
I definitely think it's somewhere in between, and I don't think I have.
No, but I mean, like, if you had to try and peg a number. I mean, I understand that I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to iterate. I'm not like a scientist or a statistician, and I don't claim to or posture to be, and I don't think you should either. If you don't have statistics,
do you think that it has increased
10,000%? What I'm saying
%?
is, for you to criticize a certain community of using a statistic, 1 out of 5, as sensational or ridiculous,
because the people who actually created that statistic say that it's being misused.
Sure, and you're using a statistic that's 20 years old.
Because it's the best statistic available. Again, if you're willing to give me better statistics, I am more than willing to hear them.
No,
and as I've said, if you provide me new evidence, I'm more than willing to change my mind.
Fair, yeah. No, I mean, I don't think I have the political knowledge to debate that. So, like, just a couple things. So, moving forward, I think you talked about, I don't know, you said, like, you mentioned Jim Crow laws and slavery for what kind of pushed black people back, and you said, okay, this is in the past. Again, this is an example of taking the opposition's argument, making a caricature of it, and dropping it down real fast. Everyone knows about Jim Crow. Everyone knows about slavery. Not as many people know about, for example, redlining in Chicago in the 1960s that the CBL had to push out by 1964. These kinds of systems have been entrenched for years. I think most people have read Ta-Nehisi Coates' article on how this has developed a system of entrenchment for these communities. Even today, under Rahm Emanuel, who's a Democrat and I think is wrong, implements TIF increment financing that takes money out of western and southern Chicago and reappropriates them to places that don't really need it as much. Clearly, there's a lack of funding. He closed 47 schools over the past years. What I'm basically trying to say is there's a lot of factors going on in these communities that are predominantly black, Hispanic, etc. And for you to simply say that, okay, Jim Crow happened 50 years ago, racism hasn't increased, is a bit, I think, again, insincere, because I don't believe that racism has, I do believe that racism has decreased, and, we're saying the N-word less, sure, but I don't think that racism at a systemic level has decreased, because the same communities that were affected in the 1960s, those people are still alive.
That's a wild accusation. I mean, I'm with you all the way up till the end. When you say there's a lot of complexity to these arguments, I agree there's a lot of complexity to these arguments. Yeah, I'll tell you where there's no complexity, and that is the only way you are going to get out of the current problems that you are in is by relying on yourself to make good decisions. That's not to say that there aren't obstacles, and if there are obstacles that you can name, I'm more than happy to stand there and fight them with. If you can show me evidence of redlining by a bank in which a black person and a white person are being treated unequally with exactly the same application, I will stand next to you and root for them to be prosecuted in court, because that's illegal under the Civil Rights Act. But if you're going to suggest that racism has not decreased over the last 50 years, it's just sort of hidden, there is no evidence to suggest that whatsoever.
Sorry, I might have misspoke. So, I agree with you. That was my bad. I don't think racism has increased. It's absolutely decreased. But I think that the institutions that existed 50 years ago haven't really vanished. The title character of the Atlantic story, Clyde Ross, I went to his house. He is experiencing the same things that he experienced 50 years ago. The government will come by. And I know you say that the government shouldn't fix this, and I agree. I'm just saying the government shouldn't make it worse. The government comes by. They say, hey, we're providing subsidies for these communities to become better. You can use it for paint for your house, better windows, anything that the public can see to make it look better. But he doesn't have heating in his house, but he can't use it for that because that's just not the system that's in place.
Right.
All I'm saying is
the government sucks, yeah.
But I totally agree with you on that. But all I'm trying to say is...
So come to the dark side.
Yeah, I guess all I'm trying to say is I definitely agree that these are complicated. I think the left and the right, they take small points and they sensationalize them to create a political platform. I would just appreciate it, since you are a journalist and not a politician, to do the same kind of due diligence when you really offer input, because a lot of people listen to you, a lot of people respect your opinion.
Well, okay, so again, the article that you're citing by Ta-Nehisi Coates, I haven't actually read that article, so I'm not going to claim knowledge of an article that you've read and I haven't. So I'll take your account of the situation for what it is, which is there's some guy who is apparently being victimized by the government because the government will only give him subsidies for X, Y, and Z, but he actually wants it for A, B, and C. My answer to that is that it's not the government's job to provide subsidies for anyone. And if the government is mal-appropriating subsidies, I object to that regardless of the race of the person. Like, I object to subsidies to the ethanol boondoggle in Iowa, which is basically white people. I object to subsidies to Wall Street. I object to all these subsidies. I don't think the government should be involved at all. And this fellow who, was victim to pretend that systematized discrimination under Jim Crow that was happening in 1960 is the same as a badly run government program in 2017 because they want to give you money for your windows but not for your water heater. Again, I don't see the relationship between the two. And to suggest that the banks are operating in the same way now as they were operating in 1960, I don't see the evidence for that either. I'm happy to look at evidence, but I need actual evidence. I can't just base it on headlines.
Could you please explain the unholy alliance between the left and the forces and the Muslim supremacists, considering that the premises and the principles of both of them are mutually incompatible?
Okay, so they're not mutually incompatible to point A, they are to point B. What I mean is that it's a timeline. The left wants to tear down Western civilization because it thinks it's unequal. The radical Muslims want to tear down Western civilization because they think it's evil. So to the point of tearing down Western civilization, they're pretty much on the same page. It's where they go from there that's a problem, right? One side wants to build a caliphate and the other side wants to build a communist utopia. The reason that the left is routinely, and it's almost invariable, that the left ends up siding with the world's worst human beings in every situation is because, again, if you just go back to that fundamental leftist principle that equality of outcome is all that matters in life, that equality of outcome means that something just is happening, think about it. The real world is a place where God designed it this way. I believe this. God designed it not for every individual, but certainly for the vast bulk of humanity. If you do responsible, good things with your life, you will be more successful than if you do irresponsible, bad things with your life. Well, if the left believes that people who are unsuccessful are more virtuous, then what that means is that the non-virtuous are more virtuous, right? Because the people who are unsuccessful are generally not doing good, responsible things. And the left says, well, those people are victims, let's help them. Right? So the Muslims in the Middle East are victims of Israel. They must be victims of Israel because Israel's rich and its neighbors are not. So they must be victims. Well, the real reason that the Muslims, the Palestinian Muslims, for example, are poor is because they've spent all the money that has been given to them, hundreds of billions of dollars, all the money that's been given to them over the course of decades, and they've spent it on terrorism, and they've spent it on stocking it away in their bank accounts of Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and they've spent it on garbage, and they spent it on anti-Israel propaganda. That's the real reason they're poor. But the left looks at it and they say, they're poor. That means they're virtuous. This is why I hate it, really despise it, when Republicans do the whole, I'm a better person because I have a rags to riches story. You weren't a better person when you're poor. Okay, no one is a better person just because they're poor. By the way, no one's a better person because they're rich. All that wealth is a measure of how many voluntary exchanges you engaged in a free market. That's all that wealth is. But the idea for the left is that all inequality is evil. Therefore, the people who are unequal at the top are evil and the people at the bottom are virtuous. Which is why you'll hear people on the left say things like they like small business, but they hate people who are big business, like the Walmart family, right? The Walton family. They're terrible.